This video is sponsored by, easily our most popular sponsor this season, My Cat Chunk.
I can't kill any more time. Let's go.
Hank, it is only round 5.
Let's go.
Dang, look at us, huh? Made it all the way through the first season, and in just a month too. That's crazy. What a ride it's been, and it's the shortest season of the original 13. Definitely the Toshiro of the bunch. This retrospect will serve as a chance to examine any themes that were present throughout the season, discuss breakout or breakdown characters, and to generally talk about any lingering thoughts or feelings I have for the episodes as a whole. If you've seen any analyses from the legend himself, the real Jims, then you know what you're in for. And for the first season of the show, I don't tend to think of it as a particularly strong showing, at least not compared to the extreme heavy hitters that are to come, but there are some certified classics throughout the season, and best of all, I wouldn't say that there are any outright bad episodes. But really, to begin this discussion, I want to shout out something that I haven't mentioned in any of the reviews, and that is the absolutely legendary opening of this show. It's something we're so used to, and it doesn't go through many variations or iterations, but it's easy to take it for granted, and I really want to give the show a bunch of praise for picking the perfect opening. On top of being so wonderfully expressive and full of life, which is ironic given that the guys are just standing there the whole time, I think it actually has one of the strongest beat drops of like any opening ever. It's a beer can beat drop, for God's sakes. How genius is that? And showing the progression of the day, the comings and goings of the neighborhood, is brilliant as well. It really gets us in this setting. The opening communicates how these guys are sedentary, stalwart, almost eternal figures in an ever-changing world. They are our North Star, and when you see them standing there by their fence, that's how you know you're home. That's how you know you're about to witness something special. The opening invites you to crack open your own drink, settle in, and get ready to spend some time with some friends. Buckle up, it says, because we're in for a rootin' tootin' time. Ooh, it's so good. But ho-hum, I don't want you to think that I'm just some nostalgia-blind fanboy. There are definitely some baby wrinkles here that are a bit odd to deal with. So let's begin by talking about the weakest points of the season, as there aren't that many, and once they're over with, then we can spend the rest of the time gushing, and that sounds like a winner of an evening to me. And perhaps surprisingly, I think the most lacking aspect of the first season is just how barren the rooms and settings are, especially in the first 6 episodes. I don't normally like to talk smack about animation stuff, as that is far outside of my wheelhouse, but this is quite noticeable. And yes, I'm noting these issues even though I can't draw for crap, but I like to say that you don't need to know how to ride a bike to know when somebody's doing it wrong. And I think these featureless walls and sparsely furnished rooms are a big holdover from the Beavis and Butthead design philosophy. But because King of the Hill characters are so static and on model, I mean no one's getting electrocuted in this over-the-top manner like we see in Beavis and Butthead, which means that we need to see a more fleshed out world than the other show. King of the Hill needs to have more stuff going on in the background to keep things interesting. And yes, I very much enjoy the watercolor style. Some of those grassy fields and skies are so exquisite, but it does leave the characters feeling like they're a bit adrift, floating in just this big open nothingness, lost in a labyrinth of yellow, oh, so yellow wallpaper. This striking emptiness clears up a bit when we're in Hank and Peggy's bedroom, or when we go to places like the Hotel Arlen or the Dallas Boggle Championship, but there are times where I'm a little caught off guard by how empty these places can be. It isn't every room or anything, but there are just moments where I'm caught off guard and go like, oh my god, so weird, look at how empty that is, what the heck? In addition, I feel that the character models needed until the constipation episode, which is about halfway through the season, to really lock in place. Oh sure, their clothes and general look are fine by episode 3, and there's even a surprising variety of outfits for everyone, but there's this just thing going on with their eyes that kind of weirds me out. They look tinier than they should be, something about the whites of their eyes just not being expressive enough, too much face, you know what I mean? This is more of a flower bud than the full bloom. But that's getting really nitpicky and getting lost in the weeds. You see why I don't talk about animation that much? But forget about all of that, let's get down to the brass and balls, the nuts and bolts of this gratuitous goodie bag, and that is character. In terms of screen time and plot significance, this season is almost entirely focused on the Hill family alone. And yes, we'll get an enjoyable introduction to Con or Cotton here or there, but their episodes are all centered around how their existence affects the Hill family. No one else really gets to take a bite from the pie, creating a situation where it's just Hank, Bobby, Peggy, and Luann, and everybody else gets thrown into a basket called secondary characters. None of those hangers-on were allowed to carry an episode on their own, which tells me that the writers were very nervous about getting lost in tangential characters and wanted to strengthen their core before expanding the cast. You can kinda understand this fear a little bit in the Willie Nelson episode, where his star power kinda shoves everyone else out of the way, so perhaps the writers were correct in restraining themselves to getting the Hills just right. And while I'm not against celebrities voicing themselves, I want to propose an alternative way they could have used Willie Nelson as a voice actor. Perhaps instead of having the Hills meet Willie Nelson and going to his big estate, they could have instead made the plot more about Bobby's excellent golfing skills. You don't just chip in a ball like that by pure luck. While at the golf course, have the guys perhaps meet an older guy, voiced by Mr. Nelson himself of course, who is impressed by Bobby's skills and offers to give him lessons. Then perhaps you could make it a little thing where the Willie Nelson golf tutor realizes that Bobby only cares about golf because Hank does, which would lead us to the same point as in the original episode, which is that Bobby already has a hero who isn't Vijay Singh or Mike Weir, but Mr. Hank Hall. And that's definitely getting a little too far into fanfic territory, so let's circle back into how the writers succeeded in solidifying the Hills as excellent characters. And they have to be excellent characters, these fanfics don't just pop out of the ether, Hank, Bobby, and Luann are a lot like sharks or horseshoe crabs. Once they arrived on the scene, there was really nothing that needed to be done to improve upon them, just little tweaks and twerks, and that's about it. Peggy, though, she was more like a primate, not bad, but definitely could benefit from a little evolution.
Here's a monkey with 4 asses.
But this leaves us in this weird situation where everybody else outside of the Hill family has practically the same level of importance. There is a legit argument that Dooley, Mr. Brutally Direct himself, gets a comparable amount of check-ins as we get from Bill. And Bill definitely gets more, of course, but for a majority of the season, Bill is rarely given the opportunity to shine, making him something of the black sheep of the group. And it's crazy to me that neither Dale or Bill have anything to say on Bobby's embarrassing moment of getting caught kissing the practice head. Any of the later seasons would have had a groaning table of jokes written down for Bill or Dale to use. Without their input, the guys are left feeling extremely vestigial, almost as if the showrunners were embarrassed of them, or at least embarrassed that they didn't know exactly what to do with this bunch of guys. Oh, don't get me wrong, they fell in love with Boomhauer pretty darn hard, and Dale eventually grew out of getting maybe one good scene per episode, but they are only on the edges of our frame right now. It's also really weird that some of the most notable side characters of the show didn't appear in these early episodes at all. Perhaps the most egregious example of this is Buck Strickland, who is completely AWOL in Season 1. And yes, we do get to see the outside of Strickland Propane, but the man himself doesn't show, which makes it feel like Hank is running the business entirely from his desk. And seriously though, the 2 times we actually see Hank at work, the first time is in the Sex Ed episode and the other is when Cotton shows up, Hank is stuck behind that desk. He doesn't move at all. Hey, so quick correction here. As I was editing the video, I realized that I missed a time where Hank was at work. During the smoking episode, he starts off at his desk, but then goes outside to smoke with Enrique and almost kills him. I don't know how I forgot about that time, but yeah, so that's another time where he's sedentary at his job. I don't know, Hank just really likes sitting down, I guess. So whatever, I'm sorry, I missed one. I've ruined the video. And while we're on the subject of Cotton, I think he's the easy MVP pick of the secondary characters, blazing far ahead of all of the others, with potentially the exception of Dale. Cotton just leaves an incredible impression that is impossible to ignore, for better or worse, and I think the King of the Hill really needed someone like him, someone that Hank couldn't intimidate, reason with, or threaten to kick their ass. In a very real sense, Cotton is Hank's ultimate weakness, the foil that pushes him into a corner and demands that Hank either grow or die. Con, by comparison, is very non-confrontational, where Min is the one who comes in swinging, torpedoing Peggy in a very wonderfully catty way. But perhaps the secret MVP of the season's secondary characters is Connie, as she feels like such a natural companion to Bobby, and I would say feels like a better character than Joseph, who is sort of stuck being part of the John Redcorn joke. Connie just has this great sense of chill coolness around her, something that would be lost as they made her a nerd who loves her books. Why don't you go read some Michael Foucault or Jacques Derrida or Hannah Arendt, you post-modern fuck! Instead of diving into Hannah Arendt's ideas on humanism, Connie is seen getting her hair dyed by Luann, showing that she's a casual stopper-by to the Hill House, has some pretty amusing moments with Hank and Peggy, and shares that super adorable kiss with Bobby. And thinking about that kiss more, it's actually quite surprising that the writers allowed that moment to even happen, as there were no romantic or flirtatious anything from either of the kids before that. There wasn't even a will they won't they idea going on, ooh. It was just a little moment shared between two kids with no reflection on what it meant in the grander scheme. If anything, it didn't fundamentally change how they saw each other. I think a lot of shows would have made the two become boyfriend and girlfriend at that moment, or turn into this huge earthquake situation, but the show demonstrated a level of casual maturity about this, demonstrating that they won't hyperfixate on something that, ultimately, is just something that happened one day. And sure, we could dismiss this as the show simply maintaining a status quo, as many other shows do give us hints at these romantic situations, but then we'll immediately backtrack. The worst example of these is probably The Simpsons, but King of the Hill does go through mini arcs that maintains changes throughout certain seasons. Well, okay, they'll maintain stuff up until a certain point in the show, but that topic is a whole video on its own, so let's just settle, calm down, and talk about who was the best overall character this season. And for me, I think the best character can be defined via the central theme of this season, which, in my view, is one word: acceptance. And who is the one person that the show is constantly going back to check in with, to see if they accept or reject what's going on? Could it have been Reagan Ridley, this horse-faced man, or perhaps this burger boy? I mean, I don't know, it could be all three. I've never watched any of those shows. I'm not very subtle in my attempts to gauge your interest in other projects, am I? Well, I hope you can accept me the way that Mr. Hank Hall accepts his friends, family, and neighbors throughout this season. That theme of acceptance isn't present in all of the episodes, but it's in a lot more than I was expecting. After all, Hank accepts that his son Bobby's a little weird, he accepts that Peggy has a responsibility to her job, that Wimatanya is the one true god, that he's a hero to his son, that Luann is here to stay and that's a good thing, that his colon needs to be maintained, that his neighbor's a good person, that Peggy is more important than any Mower Expo, regardless of whether it takes place on a Sunday, or Saturday, that giving up smoking is a tough but smart thing to do, that Dale deserves to live no matter what he did to his lawn, and that Bobby is only doing to that head what Hank wishes he could do to propane. The only episode that has Hank reject anything is the one with Cotton, but you can make the argument that he's really just embracing what Peggy said and is sticking up to his dad for the good of his family. Hank is very much the center of this universe, and while you might be tempted to say, duh, about that, there are certain points in the series where he does get a bit lost in the shuffle, and we don't see him for certain spaces of time. Either that or he's just more of a Debbie Downer. Sorry about that, Debbie. Anyway, I should clarify that I don't want every episode to be completely enthralled with checking in with Hank all the time. I'm not one of those guys who thinks that whenever Hank isn't on screen, the rest of the characters should really be asking, "Where's Hank?" It's just that Hank, much like that one wart you've been ignoring, is worth paying attention to. He's just so outraged, so wonderfully disgusted and exhausted by the world. How can we help but go and investigate how he feels about certain topics? It reminds me a lot of why we're so fascinated with babies and pets like cats and dogs. Their expressions are almost understandable, but not 100%, so we get a lot of joy and fascination out of deciphering their inner thoughts. But Bobby, I've got a pretty good idea how that kid reacts to things, either with total apathy or little boy excitement. Peggy? She flip-flops between calm joy and frustrated indignance. Seriously, I'm trying really hard not to call Peggy a nag, but that's how they're writing her. She's very much in the fun police role, which is ironic given that Hank eventually becomes the one to keep her from going crazy with wide-eyed schemes. But you see, I'm already making so many comparisons to future seasons that it's hard to keep focus on just this one. In summary, Season 1 is short, extremely focused on driving in a few key traits and ideas, and isn't against allowing weird or scandalous things to happen. It is also full of dream imagery and imaginary situations. It's a very cerebral experience, although never reaching into the dreaded cutaway territory. But, and this may be weird coming from me, I think this is a very bare-bones season, the mere skeleton of what it was to become. And hopefully the same can be said of my very own channel. As we go through these seasons, more depth and nuance will occur in King of the Hill, and I really hope the same will happen to me. We'll both become more fleshed out, I'm sure. Or maybe not. Maybe we're good with where we are. I don't know. I guess time will tell. So that's my thoughts on Season 1 as a whole. But even though we know which characters I thought was King of the Hill, what do you think? Which characters did they get right or wrong? Is any of my assessment unfair? I can definitely be a little too harsh at times, and I seem to feel differently about Season 1 every time I watch it. It's a very odd sort of duck. And before we leave it in the dust, I think there's one more thing I have to do. One more video to make on this season. So join me next time, where I'll be ranking all of the episodes from the Nancy Gribble worst to the Bobby Hill best. You know what I mean. It shouldn't be too hard this time, but whew, man, Season 2 has 23 freaking episodes. I might be setting up a format that's more than I can chew. But hey, I'm sure we'll have fun finding out. So until then, we can almost say that this season has indeed been reviewed to death. I'll see y'all over at the final coffin nail. And by the way, thanks for all the support, guys. You're great. Bye-bye.
Vote